So much for your patience. We are getting ready to get this started. It looks so great to see everyone here. My name is Alnisa Berry, and she, her. I am with the NAACP Education Committee, and we are partnering together with the Chapel Hill-Carrboro City School District to bring you this wonderful presentation. Before we get started, of course, we want to have some ground rules to make sure that we all understand how this is going to function. So first, we would ask you to please stay muted throughout the entire presentation. And this is to cut down on any distractions that may occur. Please put your questions in the chat. However, we will be checking them at the end of the presentation. And if you're on the phone, you would use *9 in order to enter your question. But again, we want to keep that to the end of the presentation. This event is being recorded, so we want to make sure that you are aware of that. And with that, we want to turn it over to Dr. Hamlet, who will give us some words to help us get started. Dr. Hamlet.
One moment, Dr. Hamlet, apologies. We are gonna request that you unmute here. Sorry about that. Okay, you should be allowed to do that now.
There we go. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Welcome, welcome. It's my honor to introduce to you Dr. Charles Barrett. He is a former colleague of mine, someone that I respect and trust and just love to hear from. And so I just want to share just a little bit with you about Dr. Barrett. He is a nationally certified school psychologist. He's actively involved in the training and development of future psychologists through his roles as assistant director, internship supervisor, and chair of the Committee on Diversity for Loudoun County Public Schools. He also is the current and past leadership, has served in current and past leadership positions within the National Association of School Psychologists, also known as NASS. Those positions include co-chair for the Social Justice Task Force and African American Subcommittee, chair of the Multicultural Affairs and Social Justice Committees, members of the Publications and Nominations and Elections Committees, and Virginia delegate to the NASS Leadership Assembly. Dr. Barrett is, like I said, he is just a true champion of this work, and he is not shy about sharing about his work as a school psychologist and his interactions with students every single day. Just a couple of the things that I've learned from him. Number one, to focus on the fence. He might tell you a little bit about that today, I'm not sure. But focus on the fence, and then he will always leave you with this. It's always about the children. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Dr. Barrett. And like I said, I've always known him to be a true champion of this hard work that we call equity and anti-racist leadership. So welcome, Dr. Barrett, and thank you for joining us here in Chapel Hill-Carrboro.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hamlet. Good to see you again. And thank you for the opportunity. I am extremely grateful to be here. Again, there are many folks out there doing great work, so always an honor to be asked to do this. So great to be here. I'm going to ask one thing from everyone. I am really informal, so Charles is more than fine. Please call me Charles. Thank you so much for that. It's my website. I will send these slides on to the good people here, so you'll have everything that I'm sharing with you as a resource. This is my website, charlesbarrett.org. You can download my app on the App Store or Google Play. Just type in Charles Barrett. You'll see that, and you can subscribe to get some daily inspiration from me by clicking on that link. So love to engage with you and stay connected. Social media. As Dr. Hamlet said, I do a lot of sharing about my work as a school psychologist with children. So on Instagram and Twitter, I'd love for you to follow along as well. using these hashtags, and I'll tell you what those are in a second, but I do believe it is always, always, always about the children. So I want to share that with you as well. And then Today in School Psychology, these are 2 books I've written that you can find on Amazon or my website. Volume 2 just came out last summer, just some funny things kids say to me, and lessons learned in the field. And I'll share some of those with you as we go along tonight. Just really wanting to make content accessible to people from various professions or even lay folks to understand how we can do better by children, both as educators, but also as families and community members. Get your water bottle at the website too. Let's stay hydrated. And here's our time today, 4 sections that then we'll have some time to engage and connect as well. So connection followed by content. I'm going to give you a challenge and then a closing. So connection, content, a challenge, and then a closing. Thank you again for joining this evening. Here's our connection in the chat for me. A, B, C, or D, how are you feeling right now? A is the cart, B is oh boy, C, heavenly joy, D, are you on the couch or do you want to be on your couch, kind of crawled up? How are you feeling? E is all the above, and combinations are fine as well. How are you feeling? C, oh, you're kind. A, I get it, Tony. Some B's in there, some A's. Yeah, holding on to the weekend. It's only Monday. That's a pretty strong statement. But thank you for your engagement. I do this, I oftentimes speak to other psychologists or school-based mental health providers, but regardless of your role as an educator or as a community member or parent, family member, I want to normalize how you are feeling. We are still living in very challenging times, COVID and otherwise around us. And however you're feeling is more than okay. At least for the next 90 minutes, we're going to get through this together. So whatever you're feeling, more than okay to feel that way. So I want to do that for you. And thanks for your engagement. Today and every single day, I want you to do something for me. I want you to give yourself a break by taking a break. And I know as school-based educators, we teach children that they have to earn their break. But we're going to bend the rules and say that you don't have to earn your break. You deserve it by virtue of being a person or by being alive. So you deserve a break every single day. Take that for yourself, a few minutes just to kind of rest and recharge, relax, replenish. It's really important. After waking up feeling great and fully rested with energy, this does not mean that we should get out of bed. More rest is more than okay. So those days when you get up early and you feel good, you can stay in bed, that's all right. And then the last one I want to share with you, when it feels like I'm behind in some areas of my life, yet ahead in others, it simply means I'm exactly where I am supposed to be. So just a little inspiration, encouragement I want to share with you. Subscribe to the app and get those yourself if you would like to. All right, Today in School Psychology, I want to share this with you because it's meaningful to what we're going to be talking about for the next few moments this evening. I was testing a young man, first grader, and the kid said to me between test items, "You are big and brown and have brown skin." Most of the kids that I serve as a school psychologist do not look like me. And this was his response when we were working together. Then I hear this sometimes, "Is he your father?" Again, when very few of my students are Black students, I may hear this if I'm with a Black student, working with them, take them back to class, I hear them murmuring, amongst themselves, "Is that so-and-so's father? Is that so-and-so's dad?" And this is what it taught me, the wisdom of children. If children can admit to seeing color, why don't we? Why don't we do this as adults? This idea, this notion of being colorblind, though I understand in theory what it's trying to suggest or where it comes from, it is ultimately not helpful. We have to see difference. We have to acknowledge difference in people, be it race, ethnicity, or other dimensions of difference. because not seeing that is actually more harmful to individuals. But I also want to leave you with this idea that the issue is not that we see color or that people exist in different hues or different backgrounds. The issue is that we have assumptions that we assign to people of different colors. So again, let's take that childlike wisdom, the childlike innocence, and really acknowledge difference, acknowledge color, and work towards a more equitable and just environment for all of our children and families. So just want to share that with you. This is why a day without direct contact with kids is wasted. I love students, love children, and working with them is the highlight of my life. So today, I have one overarching objective whenever I share with people, and it's always to encourage people. I'm not here to be critical of your practice or where you are in your growth and development, but I want to encourage you to keep going and to do more, to be more responsive to children and families in your various roles. In the chat for me, if you can indicate your professional background, if you're a teacher, if you're an educator, or if you're here as a parent, a guardian, or a family member. Just want to get a sense of who I am speaking with this evening. All right, see some parents, teachers, social worker, teacher, educator, and parent, school nurse, social worker, PTA, school psychologist. All right, Melissa. Good to meet you. I'm not alone tonight. SLP, wonderful, thank you. Executive director, community member, not probably, and wonderful, excellent. Thanks so much, higher ed, wonderful, thank you so much for that. All right, so promoting racial justice in children, what everyone needs to know, whether you're a parent, community member, curious about the topic, educator, what everyone needs to know about this work. So again, maybe this framing question, what do I need to know in order to engage effectively in discussions about race, racism, and I'm going to talk about Black Lives Matter a little bit with children, with students, my own children, my own students in my school, my classroom. What do I need to know about this topic? Consultant, thank you, Elmira. So here's our learning objectives in visual form. Why is it important? How do we do it? And then what do I do? What does it mean? Why is it important? How do I do this? And then what do I do specifically in order to engage in these discussions? Hey, Miss Day. Thank you, Dr. Trice, as well. I don't want to mess up your name, but Day, last name, another school psychologist. I appreciate you being on as well. So here's our content for tonight. Why is this important? So I want to start by anchoring this, this talk a little bit around race. And I know Dr. Trice mentioned at the end, but yes, thank you for that. Also put in the chat so you don't forget your questions and comments. Thank you. So I want to anchor this by first talking about or highlighting three fundamental realities about race. And then we'll talk about some other things as we go forward. The first thing I want to share with you is that race is a social construction, meaning that it is an idea, a construct that has been made by people. And then depending on where you fall in this social construction, there is more privilege or more marginalization that you can benefit from or you experience. So first, it's a social construction. For those of us who are of different races and ethnicities, there is little to no biological difference between us. I think it's less than 1% is different biologically between people of different races. So social construction. The next thing I want to say that it's a model and is the foundation for how marginalization works and remains active. And what I mean by that is I don't mean to minimize the other isms or the other types of oppression that exists in society. So classism is real, homophobia and transphobia, sexism, ageism, classism, all of those things are real, but we understand those things a lot better when we have a firm understanding of not only race or racial difference, but also the system of racism. And thirdly, understanding racial marginalization can help us to understand all the other forms of marginalization. So yes, schools and communities should be addressing all of those isms and types of marginalization that occurs to students and also families and teachers, educators, but understanding racial marginalization, understanding racism, some would say the original sin of this country, does, I believe, give us a framework, gives us vocabulary, gives us a way to really engage in those types of discussions a lot more effectively, again, to promote more equitable outcomes. So I am going to talk about families a lot today, but also those of you who might be teachers and other educators, you can simply apply, these ideas to your students and to your school. So why families or why educators? Why is this important for us to be prepared to talk about these things with children and our students? So I would say the first thing is relationship. As a parent, as a guardian, as a teacher, school psychologist, social worker, you have relationship with your children and with your students. And children, young people, learn better from people with whom they have a genuine connection with. So who better to inform them about these realities, especially a highly charged or a highly sensitive topic such as race and racism, than someone that they know. This is Dr. James Comer, noted child psychiatrist, and he says no real learning happens in the absence of significant relationship. So you may not be an expert in education or psychology as a parent, but you do know your child. I always tell my students that, when you serve as a school psychologist, you may be an expert in kids, but families know their own child, their own students, their own children better than you do. So authentic relationship is the currency, I believe, for honest dialogue about these everyday occurrences that can become teaching moments for children and young people. My folks live in Charlotte, but I'm sure the landscape in Charlotte is different than Chapel Hill. So that whatever your local context is, as well as this whole national dialogue and discussion we've been having around race and kind of this racial reckoning, can be really important and teachable moments to highlight things that kids are already thinking about, but they might not know how to articulate or express themselves. So as you think about your children, your own children, or those in your school, your classrooms, think about the relationship you have with them and how you can leverage that to have meaningful dialogue and discussion. I started kind of talking about this more in the last 2 years, after COVID-19 started, and we were in these twin pandemics of racism and COVID-19. We experienced the death of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and so many others in the last 2 years, Dante Wright, now Amir Locke in Minnesota last week. But really want to stress the idea of relationship being very important, and that's why you can be effective in that role. This is a book that I encourage all of you to read, regardless of your role, parent, educator, and it's written by Dr. Beverly Tatum. The first issue or edition came out in 1997, and I believe the 20-year anniversary came out a couple of years ago in 2017. But Why Are All the Black Kids Seen Together in the Cafeteria is a fascinating read about racial relations in this country. But I want to highlight a couple things from the book. Some people say that there is too much talk about race and racism in the United States. Tatum says, I say that there is not enough. If you think about that. The next thing I want to highlight, although educators are hungry for this information, too often it has not been made accessible to them, instead confined to scholarly journals and academic volumes. So one of the things about this book, and even as we share it tonight, I want to make these ideas that can be complicated accessible, to you, a variety of backgrounds, educator or not, to really make some meaningful deposits in the lives of children and students. So if families, if teachers don't proactively talk and positively talk to their children about race, like other topics, sex, drugs, alcohol, children will come to their own conclusions that might not be what you had hoped. So when kids learn about, significant topics from their friends and the rumor mill starts, that might not be the outcome that you would desire for your young people. So really, as a person of influence in their lives, again, as a family member, educator, very, very important to become comfortable talking about uncomfortable topics. This idea, my friends out there who are educators know about things that are developmentally appropriate. And all it means is discussing concepts with and explaining topics in ways that kids can understand. And so I want to walk through a couple stages of child development: preschool, toddlerhood, childhood, adolescence, and show you what's more appropriate or more beneficial based on how old children are and what they're ready to comprehend based on their emotional maturity. Again, going back to saying that your children, think about, they might be 12 years old, but are they developmentally ready for these things based on their own emotional maturity? So beyond their age chronologically, just being mindful of, do they have the requisite emotional maturity to engage in certain discussions, and how you can be mindful of that as a parent. All right, who's heard this before, that they're too young to talk about race? And that is just not true. I'm going to show you a couple studies that highlight how from very young ages, children are very much aware of racial difference. The young man that I showed you that quote from about me being big and brown, having brown skin, he was 6 years old. He's a first grader. So even from that young age, children are aware of race and racial difference. And how is that beneficial for you to know? Silence about race reinforces racism by letting children draw their own conclusions based on what they see. Teachers and families can play a powerful role in helping children of all ages develop positive attitudes about race and diversity and skills to promote a more just future, but only if we talk about it. Only if we talk about it and not avoid it. All right, are your kids too young to talk about race? The answer is no. 0 to 1 years old, at birth, babies look equally at faces of all races, but by 3 months, they look more at the faces that match the race of their caregivers. So even as early as 3 months old, they are aware of racial difference and looking at people who look like them. As young as 2, they use race as a reason, to reason about people's behaviors. By 30 months, 2.5 years old, most children use race to choose their playmates. So we already see kind of grouping themselves together based on racial difference as early as 2.5 years old. And I'll show you a way that you can be mindful of that in a second. 5 years old, Black and Latinx children in research settings show no preference toward their own groups as compared to white children at this age, who are more likely to be strongly biased in favor of whiteness. Powerful outcome from a study back in 2008. And I'm going to share a short video in a second that might help to also underscore that. Expressions of racial prejudice often peak at ages 4 and 5, even before kids are in school. All of these outcomes we're seeing for the last 14 years in research studies. Very, very powerful. Again, 5 years old, by kindergarten, children show many of the same attitudes about race held by the adults in our culture. I was teaching earlier this evening about Vygotsky, and Vygotsky's whole point in child development was children learn based on their social environment or their social context. So the attitudes that we present as adults in their families and their communities, they learn those attitudes almost implicitly. They have already learned to associate some groups with higher status than others. 5 to 7 years old, expressive conversations with 5 to 7-year-olds about interracial friendship can dramatically improve their attitudes in as little as a single week. So again, not avoiding these discussions. They're not too young for it. What I found is that children, be it early childhood, adolescents, they're often more prepared than the adults are around them. I think we're fearful. I think we don't always know how to engage, but it's not the kids that's not ready for it. It's us that's maybe not as prepared as we should be to talk about these things with them. So let me show you something here, then I'll show a quick video that might help to highlight some things. So toddlers, again, they notice and are drawing conclusion about race, 2 to 5 years old, social status, their parents' cues, how friendly they are when someone approaches. So again, going back to social learning theory and what people do and how children pick up on those cues or those behaviors from being in the presence of other people. So my first question to you would be, or challenge to you would be, what are you engaging in, or how are you behaving that could be sending cues to your children, to your students about race? And hopefully those behaviors are positive and are helpful for their racial identity development. They look for their parents to approve when another child wants to play with them on the playground. Again, what are your reactions when you see children of different backgrounds wanting to play with your child? And how could your child be picking up on racial difference and attitudes about race based on your behavior? Although they are too young to talk about current events, they can understand race and diversity in positive terms. There's been a movement, I would say, a more active movement in the last couple of years as we're kind of wrestling with the race and racism in America in ways that I think are different than previous years or previous instances. So this push to have more representation in media, in books and other materials can be very, very beneficial to toddlers to see themselves represented in different ways, in different spaces. Now, here's on these last few points on the bottom, I think are some cautionary notes based on, again, developmental maturity. Because their brains are developing rapidly, they're also very sensitive to things that are scary and a bit frightening, on TV, on social media. So for that reasons, they should not be exposed to TV news or social media, things that you may watch with your older children or watch yourselves. Those would not be appropriate for them developmentally. Also, don't discuss sensitive topics when they're in earshot. For those of you who are either raising young children or have raised young children, you know that they are sponges, and whatever you say, they are likely to repeat at some point, maybe at the least opportune time. So they are certainly receptively benefiting or taking in information around them, although they can express it, maybe in the most efficient way. Tone of voice is also very important to be mindful of. They may not, again, understand all the words you're saying, but they can tell if mom and dad are happy, if mom and dad are sad or worried or angry, upset. So just be mindful of not only what you're watching that they can hear on TV or through social media, but certainly the tone of voice and them overhearing your conversation or discussions about sensitive topics. Very, very important for that, them to not be exposed to certain things based on their age. I want to stop sharing for 1 second, and I want to show you a quick video. It's about 2 or 3 minutes long, but it does highlight a very important point that I want to tell you about. And give me 1 second. I'll be right back for you. with you.
You booked.
And when I start sharing, if someone can just give me a thumbs up that you can see my screen.
We can, thanks.
Thank you.
A sunny Verbo ski chalet with endless views of snow-covered peaks.
Kate Cronkite says, we often hear it's important to get to know Black people, to start a dialogue, but how do you do that if you live in an all-white world? Kate Cronkite wants to know.
Kate, let me say this to piggyback on the wise words Oprah just said. Just because the world is white doesn't mean your world has to be.
Ooh, the church.
Just because the world is white, Kate, it does not mean your world has to be. Again,
You are only 30. Look at these pearls just dropping like that, and you're only 30. Kate, that is it right there. Everybody give a hand clap, shout out to that. Hello, high five. Just
Look
because, say it again, say it again.
Okay, just because the world is white, it does not mean your world has to be. When I grew up, again, all white private school, I graduated with like 5 people of color. That world was white, but my world wasn't. See, I still had some Black friends, like I told you at church, like I told you in small groups, like I told you in sports. Kate, Black people exist. It's not like Black people are hiding under rocks. You just cannot be like water. Kate, if I were to pour water on the ground right now, it would take the easiest path, the path of least resistance. We navigate the easiest path. I live in this white neighborhood. Let me just go to the white youth leagues and the white church and the white temple and the white this and the white that. Kate, push against the path of least resistance. It'll be better for everyone.
Thank you for that. I want to show you that quick example. I want to come back and underscore something in a moment. I share that because I think it was back here, normalize difference by developing meaningful relationship with people from different backgrounds. I do believe that children become what they see. And if they see only individuals from a certain background in their families and their friends and their parents, then that becomes their world and their worldview. But if you normalize that we have friends from a variety of walks of life and backgrounds, then I think that is certainly helpful for your children, especially at the toddler age. So I just want to highlight that point from Emmanuel Acho. So what cues are you even unintentionally giving your child? I do think that sometimes our behavior is not meant to be intentionally harmful or intentionally problematic, but the effects can still be such if we're not careful. But so what cues are you even unintentionally giving your child? Again, based on how you respond when a child of another age, of another race or background wants to play with them. If all your friends represent only one background, what message are you sending to your child, even unintentionally? If you would like to, read that book, Uncomfortable Conversation with a Black Man, I do think it's a very easy read, a very introductory read to start just thinking about issues of race and difference and privilege and other important ideas. So just a resource for you. Preschoolers believe that everyone should be treated fairly. So you've heard it's not fair, he took my turn, all those things that kids say in preschools. They are aware of race and draw conclusions based on what they perceive. So if they perceive that so-and-so went twice and they skipped me, that's not fair. You use concrete and relatable examples about fairness and feelings. How do you think Johnny felt when you took his toy? How do you think so-and-so felt when you did not say good morning to them and he said good morning to you? So when you talk about these ideas of difference, relate them in the most concrete terms you can. That's what kids are available or able to discern and to access based on their developmental maturity. Like toddlers, they should not be exposed to TV news or social media and should not hear you discussing sensitive topics. Still a bit premature for them to hear you talking about, what's going on around you. If they ask questions about what's happening, always, always, always validate how they're feeling. That's just a good tip for, from a mental health provider. When people come to you with their problems, my job is to, validate that what you're feeling is real to you. And then we can talk about all the other nuances. And then end discussions by reassuring them that you are there to help keep them safe. If they are afraid based on what they're hearing or overhearing, as the parent, as the teacher, you're there as the adult to help keep them safe. But I do want to highlight this idea of whenever you're talking about difference, use concrete examples about fairness and their feelings. That can be helpful for them to understand the larger idea. Piaget was a child, he's actually a Swiss biologist, but did a lot with child development. Children's moral thinking tends to shift from what's real to relative, so realism to relativism. Very young children regard moral issues as real, inviolable truths about the world that are communicated to them by authorities such as teachers and parents. Whatever my teacher said, that is the gospel truth. What my parents said, that is absolute truth. And right and wrong are like night and day, like black and white. They cannot be the same at the same time. So they exist in the world and do not depend on what people think or say. So these are absolute truths that kids at this age are kind of very concrete, very literal in their thinking. So again, going back to that previous slide, related to in the most concrete terms as you can when you're talking about issues of difference and, as far as feelings. He also knows that as they get older, their moral thinking shifts from prescriptions to principles. So they can understand that if I missed my turn in the game, I should go twice, because I missed my turn previously. They understand the principle of kind of making up for what was lost. So even use that as an example of why we might give more people different support, or might give them more. I'll show you an image of that later on as well. Childhood. Going on to childhood. So now we're talking about maybe elementary age children. They're old enough to hear what's happening on TV from their friends or social media. So don't avoid the discussion. Whereas toddlers and preschoolers, that might not be helpful at this age. It might be time to start engaging. Again, develop the appropriate ways by talking to them about some of what they've been maybe wrestling with or hearing on TV. One way to do that is to monitor how much they are consuming via the news or social media. One of the challenges I felt that we were going through during when schools first closed, March 2020, and then kind of throughout the year at different points, is that you had kids home, maybe watching TV on social media more than they typically would have been if they were in their school buildings. So how can parents and other adults be responsible by monitoring their intake of that information? So they're not just scrolling Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. Too much of that can be anxiety provoking. And then it leads to things like a hard time eating and sleeping, hard time concentrating, losing the interest in activities that they once felt were pleasurable or enjoyable. So as I said before, knowing your child, knowing your students, are you seeing changes in their behavior? That could be a sign that maybe they're engaging too much in this content. It's overwhelming to them. But what you can do as an alternative, and again, to monitor how much they are intaking of this content, is to watch the news with them or read an article with them to answer questions that may come up as you're engaging in these dialogues. So again, 9, 10 years old, they may have questions about what they're seeing on social media or on the news. Why is that happening? You can watch it with them and explain to them in terms that they may understand. Before engaging in discussions, ask what they've heard. So what do you think racism is? What do you think police violence is or protests? And be aware of your emotions or your responses after you ask them. They may say things that you may not agree with, or you may wonder where they got that from, but certainly monitor how you respond, because kids will take that as, maybe I said the wrong answer. Maybe mom and dad are they're mad at me for what I said. So monitor your own behavior, your own tone when you ask them these questions. But I would underscore again, watching the news together, reading together, you can much more effectively monitor their behavior and their actions and their reactions when you're with them in those settings. So if your child has questions about demonstrations, about protests, I suggest focusing on the reason for the protests and not the consequence. In other words, focus on, some people are not treated fairly in this country. Some people are upset. Some people are hurt because of what's happening where they live. That's the reason for the protests, and not what they see as a consequence of maybe disagreements between groups of individuals. I'm a big fan of using language very intentionally. So using words like demonstrations, marches, protests, rallies, and not riots sends a very different connotation to what's happening in our communities. So the words you use, the tone you use, certainly very, very important as you're explaining these concepts to children. But you can also use this as a way to identify opportunities in your own community where you can, again, engage together. As I said, reading together articles or watching TV together. You can also attend rallies, protests, demonstrations, marches together as a family and model, what that looks like to be actively involved for these issues. So again, another question, because kids become what they see, what are you modeling for them? Even unintentionally, what are you modeling for them when it comes to their questions around racial justice, around difference, around what they're seeing on TV? What are you modeling for them? The more they are actively engaged, the more they learn. So basic principle in schools, the more kids participate in their learning, when they're asking questions, when they're writing, when they're participating, the more they learn. So how can we, as families, as community members, promote or facilitate opportunities that give them a chance to be engaged and in these meaningful issues, so they can also develop and learn more as they are growing. And then again, ending these discussions by reassuring them, again, that you're there to keep them safe and to help them, to protect them as the adult, in their lives. That's a link to today's show piece about families engaging together, and some friends of mine are on it, so you can check that out if you would like. This is a quote from, I got this from former Attorney General Eric Holder, and he says, maybe the easiest way to teach children is with stories. So for instance, my son told me today that he remembers a time when we ran to catch a bus when he was 10. After we got on the bus, I told him that African-American friends of mine had forbidden their son to run in public, even to catch a bus. They were afraid that a police officer would assume that he was running from a crime and should be apprehended. So I want to give you a couple stories that hopefully will make some, one concept in particular. I want to talk about privilege for a quick second. I want to explain it using some stories, and give me some feedback in the chat if any of these things resonate with you as we go along with these short stories here. So everybody knows someone, or maybe yourself, in this situation. Have you ever stayed at a hotel that you couldn't afford, purchased an item of clothing that was priced beyond your budget? Maybe you've flown on a buddy pass of someone who works for an airline. These things are possible because of a family and friends discount, or you're close enough to someone who can give you what you want, and at a much lower rate. Here's the lesson. This is how privilege operates. It's a system of unearned advantages that people enjoy by virtue of their association or relationship with someone else, friend or family member. Because of people's positionality or proximity to wealth and power, they can provide you access to what you want for a fraction of the cost. Did you earn it? No. But did you benefit from it? Absolutely. Regardless of what some may say, privilege is real. So that's an example of a short story that I think maybe a child who's 12 years old, 13, 14, may be able to understand the concrete nature of getting a discount from a friend or going somewhere free based on, their association with someone else. So these are just examples of maybe some teaching moments that you might use with children or students as you're explaining some of these concepts. Lisa's my wife, and a couple years ago, well, almost 2 years ago, we did a home reno. I want to share another story with you. Lisa and I recently completed a home renovation. Like many others, we sought estimates from a few contractors. When walking throughout the property with one of them, he seemed rather disinterested. Not wanting to prejudge, we completed the tour, explained to him what we wanted, and said that we looked forward to his estimate. We never heard from him. Could he simply not have been interested in the job? Yes. Could he have lacked the interpersonal skills to earn a customer's business? Yes. As a Black man living in America, race is always a consideration. Would he have presented as disinterested if we weren't Black? Perhaps. Would he have at least given an estimate if we weren't Black? Possibly. Did he think that we couldn't afford the scope of the work that we were requesting? I don't know. Although using the word that you are trying to define in its definition is not a good idea, it's quite fitting for this situation. Privilege is the ability to not have to think about privilege. So again, just some short stories, concrete examples that I think can make some of these more complicated, concepts a bit more accessible to people, even kids at a certain age. I want to show you one more video and then we're going to talk. If you follow me on social media, you know what my favorite movie is in the whole world, but I won't spoil it for you yet.
It's amazing.
Someone give me a thumbs up or let me know that you can see my screen.
You see it?
Perfect.
Talking about motorcycle insurance, and people love it.
You deserve to save.
I deserve to save.
I mean, he has a way of making you feel seen.
Bundle car and motorcycle insurance at geico.com.
Attention, s'il vous plaît, ceci est...
Yes, we have to use the phone, please. Madame, que faites-vous? I'm sorry, it's an emergency. We really have to make a call. Mais que se passe-t-il? Please, our brother's home alone. Rendez-moi le téléphone. Rendez-moi le téléphone. Thank you. I'm sorry, but thank you. Peter, I'm going to call the police. Why don't you book us a flight home? Here, get some change out of here. Call everybody you know. Oh, Leslie, here's my address book. You and Frank, call everybody who lives on our street. Maybe somebody can help us. What am I doing? Hello? I'll shut to call you back.
Village Police Department.
Yeah, hi, look, I'm calling from Paris. I have a son who's home alone.
Our phones there are out of order, so I'd like somebody to go over to our house, tell him that we're coming home to get him.
Okay, let me connect you with Family Crisis Intervention.
No, it's not a family crisis.
Hold on. Larry, can you pick up? There's some lady on hold, sounds kind of hyper.
What line, Rose?
2.
Family Crisis Intervention, Sergeant Balzac.
I'm calling from Paris. I have a son who's home alone.
Has a child been involved in a violent altercation with a drunken and/or mentally ill member of his immediate family?
No.
Has he been involved in a household accident?
I don't know. I hope not.
Has the child ingested any poison and/or any other object has become lodged in his throat?
No, he's just home alone.
And I'd like somebody to go over to the house
See that he's all right, just to check on him.
You want us to go to your house just to check on him?
Yes.
Are you connected with the police department?
No, they just transferred me to you.
Rose!
Yeah.
Piper on 2.
Hang on.
Hold on, please.
No, please don't hang up. Please don't. Any luck?
No. Couldn't get anybody.
Leslie?
I'm sorry, Kate, nothing but a bunch of answering machines.
Somebody pick up.
Oh, hi, ma'am. It's you again.
Yeah, hi. I'm calling from Paris. I have a son who's home alone, and I...
Okay. We'll send a policeman over to your house to check on your son.
There's no one home. The house looks secure. On the counter, kids again.
All right. In the chat, if you will, why do you think I showed that video in light of what we're talking about? Any ideas? Joelle, thank you. The mom assumed the police were there to help her. Excellent. Anyone else in the chat? The mom was sure that everyone needed to let her do what she needed to do, regardless of what they were doing. Okay. Privilege on display. Lori, not support from authorities. Mom felt totally entitled to kick the other with the phone. Erica, something about the child's sense of security versus the mother's. A Black family could never do this safely, like no consequences for having left the kid at home. Excellent. Thank you so much. Yes, that it hit me a couple months ago. You know, Home Alone was my favorite movie in the whole world, but this white family's first thought was, I'll just call the police and have them check on my son. As I said before, privilege is the ability to not think about privilege. So back in 1990, when this came out, long before America's current reckoning with racism and a host of other injustices systemically, even 31 years ago, I wonder, would a Black mother's first call to be to the police to check on her son? Though I can't speak for everyone, given the history between law enforcement and Black people, the police wouldn't be my first call. In fact, as a Black male, I don't know that I would call them at all if in a similar situation. Black family would have been afraid to call the police. This movie is way different now. Privilege abounds in it. Yes, thanks for your comments. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight again this idea that we can engage in certain things based on our privileged identities that might be very different for others that don't share those same experiences or identities. So always highlight Tamir Rice and the young man here whose aunt was killed by police, Atiana Jefferson in Dallas. Tamir Rice was 12 in Cleveland, or somewhere in Ohio, maybe Akron, Ohio. And this was in Dallas a couple of years ago. So just want to always just kind of make that point to highlight those young people. I wonder how this young child is doing, you know, after all these years. They were playing video games late at night and then went to bed and his aunt was killed. Wasn't her fault, nor the person that they weren't looking for, but certainly another tragedy in American history. All right, adolescents, almost done. Because of their age and maturity, parents and caregivers, you can have more in-depth discussion, you know, based on your, child being 15, 16, 17 years old. After asking what they've heard about what's happening, ask other questions to understand how they're processing what's going on, how they're feeling about it. So engaging, for example, how do you think COVID-19 shows racism in the United States? Those types of questions to kind of get them thinking and discussing more with you at that age. They're also exploring who they are, the idea of identity development coming kind of center stage. What they believe and their individual identities help them identify ways to take a stand against racism. So here's their opportunity to now demonstrate, maybe without you, maybe writing a letter to a local elected official, becoming involved in something that has a meaningful purpose attached to it. So all those things you can help facilitate for them around talking about race and racism. Many white parents talk about heroes like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. and about slavery. We also need to talk about institutionalized racism and about privilege. After all, no one is born a racist. Racism is the product of a racist system that is perpetuated with racist assumptions that permeate our institutions and shape our belief systems. Quickly, I want to give you a couple of thoughts on Black Lives Matter. This link here, when you get the slides, you could read them about them for yourself. I am not here, I want to be very clear, to promote any organization or anyone. This is not about that, but I want to give you some language, some things to think about. So this started after the acquittal of George Zimmerman, who murdered Trayvon Martin a number of years ago in Sanford, Florida. It is a movement, not a moment. We can certainly use this to really talk about what makes the idea of Black Lives Matter necessary. This organization is bringing attention to policy initiatives that disproportionately affect Black people, right? And it's about how do these things devalue Black lives for more than 400 years. So what it's not saying is Black lives are the only lives that matter. It's saying Black Lives Matter as well. Black Lives Matter too. Black Lives Matter also. I feel that when people focus on the consequences of the movement and not think about the purpose or the mission of the movement, we lose some valuable information or perspective about what they're trying to accomplish. So I was driving on 95 almost 6 years ago. I want to share some thoughts with you about Black Lives Matter. And again, hopefully this quick short story that might be helpful for you explaining this to your colleagues. First thing, everyone here has a birthday. And because each person's birthday is special, it should be celebrated. But think about this. How would you feel if it was your birthday, but a party was thrown for everyone at your school, your place of employment, or even your family? How would you feel if everyone received presents on your birthday? This is the difficulty with pitting all lives matter against Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter was never intended to reduce the significance of all lives. Everyone's birthday is special, significant, meaningful, and deserves to be celebrated exclusively. But it's also fitting to only acknowledge the person whose birthday it actually is. Today is John's birthday, and we will celebrate them with a song and gifts. Or today's Jane's birthday, we'll celebrate them with dinner and gifts. Rather than saying happy birthday to everyone, when in fact it's only John's or Jane's birthday today, we will only honor John or Jane because they matter most for this moment. When it's your birthday, we'll be sure to only highlight and honor you. So just a quick reframing of what Black Lives Matter in principle means, and not what other people or some people have tried to make it about. This is the group that is significant for this moment. We can all watch the news and talk about why that's the case, but it's never meant to pit them as being more important or us to be more important than any other group. So again, just a quick little metaphor from the lens of happy birthday. Thanks, Sherry, I appreciate that. All right, let me end this, land this plane soon. What do you think about this? Give me two E words in the chat, E word on the left and the E word on the right. I know you all know it because you're wonderful educators and smart people in Chapel Hill. Equality and equity. Thank you, Karen. I know they're coming in. Tara, Jeffrey, thank you very much. Yes, equality and equity. When Dr. Hamlet mentioned this earlier, this is what she referred to as focus on the fence. So we often hear this: I treat all my kids the same, or all my students the same. And as we know, people, kids, students are not the same. And people are well-intentioned when they say that. I know what they mean. I probably said it myself in my career, but everyone is not the same. Here's what I want to highlight for you. A few questions. What does the fence represent? What does that wooden fence represent? What is it symbolic of? Obstacles. Thank you, Jeffrey. Barrier. Give me, great, Karen. Thank you. Give me an adjective before barrier or obstacle. Joel says opportunity. Okay. It's a something obstacle or a something barrier. Structural. Getting closer, Erica. Another S word. Systemic, there we go, Erica. Thank you so much. Yeah, Tony, Heather, thank you. Systemic barriers, yes. And then the game represents whatever we want kids to have access to. So maybe it's, safe and supportive learning environment, finishing high school, being college and career ready. But these barriers prevent meaningful access and opportunity to those outcomes or those desired goals. These boxes represent the individual interventions or accommodations that we provide to kids in school. Small group reading, counseling, all the things that we do for kids. But if we're not careful, we can overlook the significance of the fence and focus prematurely on the boxes, the individual kind of intervention and care that we're providing. So Focus on the Fence is a blog I've been writing on my website, charlesbarrett.org. Click on Focus on the Fence, you can read about it. It's just about a year old. I saw in my Facebook memories that I posted part 2 today, last year. And it's a short blog that just talks about the systemic nature that we have to be mindful of as people, community members, educators, families, everyone. What I mean by that, fences are constructed, and because they're constructed, they can also be deconstructed. So some would say that justice would be poking holes in the fence, that wire fence there that we can all see through a lot easier, but true liberation would be removing those barriers altogether. Now, if you saw me in person on a good day, I am every bit of 5'5". So I understand the kid in the purple shirt who needs more support to see over the fence. But when I thought about this more, I was in a session with some school leaders last year, and someone said we have to fix the fence. And it started me thinking about this. The fence was always the problem. It was never the children or the people's height. Because when the fence was removed, when the barrier was removed, everyone has unobstructed access into what we're trying to provide. So yes, I do think we can give kids or people individual accommodations and intervention. That's very important. But as we're doing it, we have to focus on systems change, policy changes, which is fixing the fence. So thank you for your feedback in the chat as well, Sherry and Denise. Thank you for that. So yes, focus on the fence. Go to the website, click on that link. You can read the blog entries about it for that. So here's my challenge to you. I want you to never stop learning. Never stop learning. Remember these key points I shared with you earlier today around Black Lives Matter and other things, but here's some things I want you to think about. I've read both of these books. Now, they were not as impactful for me based on who I am as a Black male, but I did learn some things about white fragility. I think they're great resources. Just check them out. You can learn some different things about them. Dr. Kendi and Robin DiAngelo, both excellent writers about anti-racism work. So check those out for your own. But I do want to highlight some work from the National Association of School Psychologists around social justice. And again, these will be in your slide deck. This is hyperlinked, and here's a screenshot of the resources. These are outstanding resources for everyone. They're designed for school psychologists, social workers, counselors, teachers. There are some lesson plans on there. There's a podcast series on there. I would suggest starting here. If you're just dabbling in equity to kind of build your equity understanding, your equity literacy, I would suggest starting with these 3 ideas: privilege, implicit bias, and intersectionality. These are all free resources on that website. Again, I've used them in my own training and teaching. I have 2 school psychology colleagues on here. Maybe they've seen them or used them, but they're excellent resources for everyone. There's a whole wealth of things on there. And then check out this podcast series, just talking about different aspects of social justice. SP for SJ is a hashtag that we use on social media. School psychologists for social justice. Great podcast series, again, for your own learning and teaching. Highly recommend it for you to take advantage of those as well. So let us entertain some questions. Here's my email, website, and all those things there. But I would love to hear from you. I'm going to stop talking.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Barrett, if you have a question, please put your question in the chat. We did have one that came in earlier in the beginning, and I would like to ask that question. Would that be okay?
Yes, please.
Okay.
That's from Jeffrey.
So that came from Jeffrey.
Yes.
Is the work of oppression the same or related with different oppressed groups?
So Jeffrey, can you explain that to me or clarify what you mean by that question? I saw it, but I wasn't sure what you were actually asking.
Jeffrey, if you want to do that in the chat, you can, or you should also be able to unmute yourself at this point.
Okay, I'm faster to talk than type. Yeah, to me, just today I was thinking about how does oppression work with different groups, right? And is the function the same? Is it, like I've heard Ta-Nehisi Coates say that someone always benefits from oppression. Otherwise, why would people do it? Mm-hmm. And so I was thinking that it must be similar in terms of somebody must be benefiting from oppressing it. And it's not just, it could function similarly like that for different groups.
I'm sorry, last part?
Could it function similarly like that from different groups? So obviously with anti-Black racism, we know there's this history, and it's a huge economic, to me, a lot of it was an economic thing. Mm-hmm. Now, would it also function like that for homophobia, sexism,
Gotcha.
Different things like that?
Gotcha. I would say not necessarily. I agree that the economic benefit, if you want to say it that way, of slavery certainly was significant. The anti-Black racism that we saw, that really founded the country. But I don't know that it's always economic. But I do believe that all oppression does come back to power. So I think that who is in power, who controls narratives, who controls policy, who controls how spaces look, maybe that at some point becomes money. But I do think about homophobia and transphobia. Right now, I couldn't think of a direct economic benefit of that or function of that, but certainly I think it's about power and control, who's in, who's not in. I think it's more about those things more broadly that could translate to economic benefit. So to answer your question, I think depending on the group that is being oppressed or marginalized, I think that there could be different reasons that drive that oppression, some being economic or financial, but more fundamentally, I think it's all about power and control.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Great question.
Dr. Barrett, there was another question in the chat. What are some of the ways you've seen white parents use their privilege to make meaningful change in kids' schools, deconstructing the fence?
Yeah, so I think about people who are avid supporters of minoritized students or marginalized students. So students of color, be it Black students, Latinx students, or students who may identify as LGBTQI2S. So these could be parents who are white. These could be parents who are who identify as cisgender individuals, but they speak up actively at school board meetings, for example. So I think that they've used their privileged identity as a white woman or a white male to speak, to amplify the voices of those who are currently marginalized or oppressed by different systemic factors. That certainly comes to mind. I think about others who have been strong supporters of movements that have been intended to maybe ban books, and white parents on the front lines of that really think of, this is why we need to have diverse libraries in our classrooms. So those are two that come to mind in school districts that I've seen in my own work or in my own practice, that the voices that are advocating for what's good for all kids are not just Black parents or Black individuals or Latinx individuals or those from the community that's being marginalized, but those that are also from without it. I don't like the term ally because it seems to be overused, but I think they're performing in a way that's very much aligned with the idea of being an ally and really challenging systems. I think about, if the people who control systems are often of a certain race or ethnicity, then I think those that challenge it also should be the ones that represent the ones that control it as well. Thank you for your question.
Can I throw on my parent hat and
Absolutely.
ask you a question? So you mentioned a number of times in doing racial equity work within the family, the need to ensure that children feel safe in terms of the parent's role. This is something that we're discussing in our household, given the explicit message that, yeah, we don't always have the capacity to keep our Black children safe, right? And so how do you suggest, families balance kind of describing the reality of society with, not wanting such young children to carry the weight of that reality? Are there any strategies related to this idea of safety and the reality of kind of existing in society?
That is a great question, and one that I've lived. Give you a quick story about that. So my stepson is Black, and a couple years ago he was going to his junior prom, and somehow he forgot his keys at home, and I had my car, and I said, well, just take my car, you drive home. And for a split second, I wanted to take that back. I drive a Black BMW SUV, and all I could think about was this 17-year-old kid who looks, like me, driving this SUV BMW at midnight. So at that time, I didn't tell him about it. What my wife and I have done, and a lot of it was actually through the pandemic, was, as I was sharing before, we actually had him sit and kind of talk about these things that he was seeing online. At that point, he was 18, and we felt that he was ready for it, at that moment. But it's definitely something that I still struggle with. When is the right time? But we used the pandemic just kind of being home, being this, kind of being around each other more, as a good time. He's also a senior, he's going to college, kind of getting out there in the world by himself. So we want him to be a little more aware of the realities out there. But it's certainly a tension that I've wrestled with. Did we wait too long? Was 16 better? Was 15, the good time for him? But that one experience, with his prom night and me not wanting to scare him and ruin his prom, all those things. I didn't say anything, but I was really nervous about him driving home in that car. But we've used kind of these real life examples. And now that he's 20, he was talking to my wife a couple of days ago, and she says he gets it a lot more than maybe she thought he did. Now he's kind of out there in the world. He's in Cleveland now, going to school. I think he's kind of just coming to his own, and maybe he got it long before we thought he did too. Maybe at 14 he got it, or 15. But we use some natural kind of teaching moments as we were seeing all these things going on. We're in suburban DC, so when DC was literally on fire, that was probably 15 miles from where we lived at the time. So we use that as just a real way to make these ideas and concepts even more concrete for him and more meaningful for his own development. So I hope that helps a little bit, but it's certainly a tricky one because I think as a Black man with, nieces and nephews who look like me, I'm a psychologist, but I'm also thinking, I don't know sometimes either. You kind of, it's this trial and error like a lot of parenting is, and you hope for the best sometimes, but the best I can offer is using real examples when something happens as a teaching moment to engage further with your child about it.
I didn't see any other questions in the chat. If there are questions, this would be the time to throw them
Yeah,
up.
there's a couple questions in there.
Oh.
Elnisa, do you see them?
I do.
Okay.
One is, let's see here, you can do. This is from Deborah Stroman. Even though the research is still in progress, how do you feel the pandemic isolation, quote, arrested development, over the past 2 years has affected children in terms of their response to race and racism? And thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Deborah, as well. Thank you for that. The response to race and racism. So I think a few things. I think it depends on a lot of factors. I think it depends on the race of the child that we're talking about. I think it depends on their age and how much they've engaged in what was happening over the past 2 years. So I think if you are a minoritized individual, Black, Asian, Pacific Islander, Latinx, all that was happening with anti-Asian hate and anti-Blackness, all that was going on at that time, if you were really plugged into that, that could have a pretty detrimental effect on your mental health, especially if you didn't have healthy outlets for coping and support. If your support was only school and your friends or your counselor, your psychologist at school, then that could be a very detrimental time. But I also think that there are some people who lived pretty typically throughout that age and were not as impacted by issues of race and racism throughout the pandemic. So they could be affected very differently. So I don't want to assume that your question is in reference to minoritized individuals, but I do think they could certainly be more impacted negatively than others. And that's not to overlook or ignore the coping or resilience that individuals have. But that was a long time, to be isolated, to not have the same connections and outlets that they once had, but also what was going on almost nonstop, especially in the early days of the pandemic. That can be very, very significant to someone's mental health functioning.
Would you like to take another question, Dr. Barrett?
Absolutely, but I see Lauren had one too.
Yes, I was going back to that one. Would you like to read it yourself? Or?
I can skim it real quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, so I definitely remember the slide, and I think this slide was earlier on, maybe in the toddler preschool age. So in light of that, I would say it's less about conversation than it is about modeling, that the child's natural world looks like, many people. So whatever race mom and dad are, or whoever I'm living with, whatever race they are, that I see people routinely in my circle, in my home, at a birthday party, wherever we go, that there are people who look differently than I do. If you're referring to the earlier slides about toddlers and preschoolers, I'll say it's less about conversation than it is about modeling. The one thing that I think I mentioned is, how do parents or guardians respond when their child asks to play with someone who's not of their same race? I would just normalize that it's okay. It's fine. They're a kid, just like you, and they want to play together. So I would just normalize, how would you respond if the child was of the same race? But I think you're referring to those slides. So I would say it's more about modeling your own actions, your own behavior, kind of who your friends are and what you expose your children to, than it is about explicit conversation. Hope that helps, Lauren. Dr. Hamlet, I see a question from you. Not sure how to pull it back. Thank you for that question, Dr. Hamlet. So I don't think that it's about pulling back necessarily. I think, no problem, Lauren. I think that what you're referring to, I would say, is more raising your children in a race-conscious society. And as they get older, they will learn to navigate the nuance that although race is involved in most everything, everyone is not racist. So I think what you've done, Doc, and your husband has been to expose them to think in a racially conscious manner, which is not bad. But as they get older, I think their own maturity will allow them to kind of sort through, I know what mom and dad said, but I can come to my own conclusions about whether or not this is inherently racist. It's actually a better position to be in than to never talk about race or racism, and then not know what to do when they're in these ambiguous kinds of situations or circumstances. So I wouldn't pull it back. If you feel that it might be too much, you can modify that, but that might be a synonym, semantics for pulling back. But I don't think that pulling back is the answer. I think that you allow them to make their decisions about it based on what you've given them, and knowing who your husband are. It's been, in a balanced way, you've given them, perspective and context about what you're seeing. They'll come to their own conclusion, when it's time for them to do that. If they think that things are overly racist when they're not, that could just be their kind of what they get now in a very concrete, very literal way. For some of them, maybe your 5-year-old, your 9-year-old, but then again, you can still reframe what they're saying, that yes, race is real, but this is not a racist situation, and this is why. Hope that helps, Doc. Wonderful. Natalie Long. Natalie, can you clarify your comment?
Sure.
Please.
I apologize. It's so past when my question was. I've honestly just been racking my brain on what are appropriate ways to use my privilege and fight on these issues, because they're really, really, really important to me. And so, you know, when I think about things, could I help kids in the class, or could I join a board, you know, those kinds of things don't help the representation. You know, I would want the person in the class, you know, perhaps to be a person of color, so not contributing to the role modeling, or on the board to give up the seat. You know, I ran once and then there was a person of color who stood up. So absolutely, you know, I declined my you know, hat in the bag, so to speak. So I love your book idea. That is something we did at my charter school. We fought hard to compile lists and create, you know, GoFundMe's and stuff to get books in the classroom. But one of the challenges I've found with trying to elevate the voices, that, you know, there's two things. One, I find it's actually hard to get access to the parents, or the voices that you want to represent, for the exact privilege reasons. I have the privilege to go to a board meeting on an evening. Not everyone else does, for example. So I guess that's enough blabbing. I'm really looking for ways that I can get involved in this, that are appropriate.
It's a great point. I wanted to respond very quickly, because I think that the tension you described is real. And I think that more people should be as conscientious about what you've just articulated. I was just sharing with some students earlier today that there's a difference between advocating for and advocating with. And I think sometimes as a person of privilege, that sometimes, you know, folks can advocate for too much rather than advocating with. And part of advocating with is empowering or amplifying marginalized voices to be their own advocates. So maybe one of the roles that you and others, you know, like you, can think about is how can we empower families to be their own advocates, or most informed advocates for, you know, their children. My counter to that is that depending on the issue, it is very, very appropriate for the advocate being the person who has more privilege. So I've always said that people of color or minoritized people did not create these systems that marginalize us and others. So we shouldn't be the only ones that are charged with disrupting and interrupting those policies. So I would encourage you to think about, when is it appropriate for me to be the advocate for or on behalf of, versus when is it more appropriate for me to kind of come alongside and be the advocate with, and in that role, maybe being more support cast and empowering, you know, the own community to be their own advocates.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're running really tight on time, Dr. Barrett. We're right at 7:59.
Okay, I'm going to put my email in here if you want to email me, because I can't. Do I have time for one more or no?
It's up to you. We're not going to shut you down. I just wanted to be respectful of your time. And also, so if you'd like to address that question, and I know that Dr. Trice had an announcement, and I think we have our rest of our Black History Month events, and we just want to be respectful. So I'll leave that up to you.
All right, let me do this very quickly. Karen, it's a great question that I cannot answer in 2 minutes or 1 minute or 5 minutes, but I want to give a quick maybe idea. And Joelle, please email me. I would love to respond in more detail. So critical race theory has become this hot topic, you know, buzzword, and most of the people that are talking about critical race theory have a misunderstanding about what critical race theory really is. So this is what I would say. I don't think, no problem, Karen. I would say that I would not advise any school or school district to advertise what they're doing as critical race theory. That is a law school level theory that's taught explicitly in law school. I've never taken courses on critical race theory, but when you talk about systems of race, racism, privilege, those tenets are consistent with critical race theory. So I think teaching the principles of critical race is very much appropriate because that's just simply teaching accurate history. Where we go beyond that, you have to email me because I need to just, I think better in writing. And that's a very loaded kind of layer response I want to give you that's a bit more well thought out. The short answer, I do think, is we need as much vocal support for the teaching of history as we have for the teaching of not teaching history. I'm not a politician, but I do know that school boards listen to their constituents. And if we had more support in the other direction, I do think that could change the tide. Not always overnight, but that could be helpful. So part of my response to you is going to be, how do we mobilize and organize to get the same vocal support for what's best for kids as we have on the other side. Takeaway is focus on the fence. Wonderful. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. But yes, anyone email me, please. I mean that, charles@charlesbarrett.org. I would love to respond to your questions in more detail, especially you, Joelle. Thank you. I did not get to you. Thank you so much.
Dr. Trice, did you want to make your announcement?
Sure, I put a link in the chat. We were asking our community to join us on Saturday at 10 a.m. We have students from our school district and UNC who will be honoring Black History Month, talking about identity, race, politics, and their future. The link to the registration is in the chat, and we would love to see you on Saturday. So thank you very much.
Can folks also register on your website?
No, the link is in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Elnissa, I think we have had a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. And you should be getting a link to the recording and possibly the slides, I believe, if that's possible.
Yes.
So thank you so much. We really appreciate your attendance.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night,
Thank you
everyone.
So much.